Hello, welcome to Building Circles of Support for Resource Families. My name is Chelsea Sasha McGowan. I am a licensed clinical therapist. I am a social worker, and I am also a foster and adoptive caregiver. My husband and I have adopted 7 children from public child welfare in California. So I'm here today because Marin Foster Care Association and their program have asked me to support the families that they work with in identifying supports, building up the supports that they already have, and making sure that the families have the support that they need in order to care for high needs kids. Kids with trauma are not easy kids to care for always. So, one of the things that I like to make sure that we do when we first start is make sure that we understand what we're saying to each other when we say trauma. Because here's the thing, I can teach you all day about what trauma is. I probably do talk about it in my sleep. Um, but I'm going to need you to talk to your friends, your family, your supporters. So I need to make sure that you know what I'm talking about. When you look at this list of experiences that youth can have, neglect, abuse, community violence, exposure to domestic violence, early mental health crisis, early substance use, a lot of these things look really familiar to us as resource parents, as foster parents, because these are a lot of the reasons that our kids come into care. So we can almost guarantee that any child that you are taking care of in foster care is going to be a child that's experienced some form of trauma. So, how do everyday people respond to trauma? So, when a traumatic event happens in a community, in a family, in a friend group, people tend to come at us in some interesting ways. We get a lot of platitudes. So, time heals all wounds. It's only uphill from here. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Sometimes they're just well wishes, thinking of you, thoughts and prayers. Sometimes it brings up their own experiences for them. So when you have a traumatic experience and you share it with a group, with a community, sometimes you will in turn receive stories of their own experiences, things that are as close as they can get to what you might be going through. Sometimes people don't want to talk about it at all. Sometimes they want to avoid what we're going through. It's tough, right? It's tough to engage with the terrible things that can happen in the world. Sometimes they're avoiding because they're afraid, they're shocked, they're horrified. For some of our folks in our networks, they've been lucky enough that this might be the first time that they've ever really encountered serious trauma and serious childhood trauma. It hurts us to think of children hurting. Sometimes we share what happened. That a child came into foster care, that a bad thing has happened, and we'll get a response of anger. This is really normal for a lot of folks. We'll get a response of anger, sometimes to defend the child, sometimes to defend us. I can't believe this happened. What a despicable thing. What a despicable person. And it can feel maybe like not what we need in that moment, too. Sometimes we get advice. All we want to do is say that a bad thing happened and we're going to be told how to fix it. Anyone who is caring for a child in foster care knows fixing is not as easy on the inside as it might look on the outside. I've had this happen. I've had people burst into tears when I give them even a hint of the story of what's going on in my household or what has gone on in a child's life. I try not to share my kids' stories. I try not to overshare, but occasionally someone will get a hint of an idea of what's happened, and it will affect them so much that they lose their emotional regulation. And sometimes they're worried about you and your spouse and your children, and they think, is this a good idea? Everyday people who have never encountered complex trauma or the trauma of foster care are often unsure how to help us, how to support us, how to be there for us. And who they are out of the box, the responses they have out of the box are not always the most helpful. So I know I'm not going to be able to see your show of hands, but I bet if I asked, who's heard this is what you signed up for? It's probably my least favorite thing to hear when I'm looking for support from my network, from all the people around me, my families and friends. Sometimes we hear things from our circle that are just not supportive. It can feel like they're judging us, they're indifferent to our experiences. Maybe that they pity us, they don't quite understand, and so they feel a little bit of pity. They feel like they're mocking us, like you're not taking this seriously. And caregiving is really not easy for people to understand. One of the big questions that sort of underlies some of these responses is, why would you choose to do this? Why would you choose to exhaust yourself for someone else? And this is where I need you to have an answer. Okay, this is where I need each of you who are watching this training, who are going to take the quiz, I need you to have an answer. Why are you exhausting yourself for this child in front of you? And a lot of times this answer comes out of a place of love, of capacity, of ability, because they need you. So whatever that reason is, I need you to know it, so that when someone says something that underneath it, that question is lurking, that you've got an answer at least for yourself. So now we've identified, we've got family and friends. They know a little bit about what's happening, and now we're hoping that they can help us. They can't help us or help the children we're caring for until they understand trauma. The first step in helping your circle care for trauma is helping them understand what trauma is. There are a ton of definitions of trauma. I could probably fill pages and pages and pages with them, but this is one that I like, that I think sort of captures it in a nutshell. Trauma is an exceptional experience. It is not an everyday scary moment. It is not an everyday accident. It is exceptional in that it is powerful and it is dangerous, and it overwhelms our capacity to regulate our emotions. It is not traumatic to watch a scary movie and to jump at the jump scare. But for someone who has someone sneak up behind them in a dark alley and scare them with a jump scare, that might be traumatic because they might start crying, their heart might start beating like a drum, they might get shaky hands and not know what's happening. That is when we know we're overwhelmed. We can't regulate ourselves anymore. They've lost control of their emotions. That is a traumatic moment. There's also a developmental perspective. So if any of you have heard of the polyvagal theory, sort of the body keeps the score, this is what I'm talking about. It's an idea, it's a concept that not only do our bodies remember that experience, whether our conscious brains are remembering it, but our bodies are remembering it, we can get stuck in that space. We can get stuck in that trauma mode. And so even when the threat's gone, even when we're safe again, our body is still perceiving danger. And so now, after that experience where someone snuck up on you in a dark alley, now you're afraid of the dark, and every time it's dark, your hands get shaky and your heart starts beating like a drum. You are stuck in a traumatic loop. Children who experience trauma can continue to experience trauma symptoms long after they're in a safe place with safe people. So even if your home has been nothing but safe for a child, they can still be stuck in this traumatic mode and experiencing these traumatic symptoms. And what does that do to your body? What does that do to a child when they are stuck in that endless loop of trauma? A lot of stuff, unfortunately. One of the ways that we describe this, and by the way, there's a bunch of different models for this, but I like to keep it simple, right? When we're explaining this to our friends and family, they might not have all the training or the history or the experiences we've had, so let's keep it simple. We're going to call it toxic stress. So stress is a normal part of life. Getting anxious about things, feeling behind, feeling overwhelmed, and how we cope with that, all of that is a normal part of life. Toxic stress is unhealthy for anyone's brain and body, and it is exceptionally unhealthy for children. So toxic stress is when we have excessive and prolonged stress responses. So if every time it gets dark, your hands get shaky and your heart starts to pound, it's excessive because it's normal for it to be dark sometimes. And when it's prolonged, right, so when this happens over and over again, it is incredibly harmful to our bodies, okay? And when we experience this, it is compounded, it is made bigger and worse when we also don't feel safe. So if we're in the dark and we're not with someone we trust, or we're in the dark and we're alone, we're in the dark and we're outside and we're not home cozy in our bed under our warm blanket, that's going to make our stress bigger and more harmful to us, and especially for the kids. So when we talk about trauma, and when you talk about trauma to your friends and family, we're going to talk about toxic stress. We're going to say our kids are under enormous amounts of stress they don't know how to deal with because they've had these prolonged exposures to scary events that their bodies can't forget. So now that we know what it is and how we're going to talk about it, what the heck helps it? Because that's the name of the game, right? Is we didn't get into this just to warehouse a traumatized child. A lot of us got into this because we want to help a child, we want to heal a child, we want to provide safety for a child. And so I just like to remind people every time I do a training, really, what helps trauma is to have safe relationships with safe people, is to be securely attached to people that you know are going to love you and are going to want you, and to have trust that the caregiver that you know loves and wants you and that you know is safe is also reliable, so that when your hands start to shake and your heart starts to pound and you get scared, that person's going to be there for you. All of these things you can see circling around this, right? We need a safe, supportive environment. We need an emphasis on bonding. We need all of this. All of it surrounds an emotionally connected parent, which means we need you as caregivers to have support, to be emotionally regulated, to be ready, to be responsive and trustworthy, to be ready to bond with these kids. So what we need you to do is to understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, you can also understand who your current support is and what we can do to make that work best for you. So, what do we do? Disclosing trauma to family and friends is a really tough one because we've got limitations around us, right? When bad things happen, we want to reach out for help. When we find out something devastating about a child in our care, when our child has a behavior that traumatizes or scares us, we want to ask for help. So for the average person, for the regular person, for us in our regular lives, when we get distressing news or have a distressing experience, we call our friends and our family and we ask for their support, their advice, their comfort, their help. That's what we do. However, in foster care, there are rules of privacy. And the thing about privacy is that it can become a burden of secrecy. So we can feel like we are being emotionally overwhelmed, but because of the privacy around this child, this bubble of silence, we feel like we're keeping secrets, and those secrets are weighing on us. So with resource parents, with foster parents, instead of asking for help, we're feeling isolated, and we're feeling like we can't reach out for support. So when families do reach out for support, we, again, keeping private and just saying, I'm having a hard time because my child has been so stressed and so traumatized. We sometimes get ambivalence. People don't know how to respond to us. And sometimes, and this is something that I see as a therapist, so as a therapist that serves families and children, I see this shift come up a lot in my work. The question changes for that family or friend, for that person in your circle. It changes from how do I help my loved one care for this child to should my loved one care for this child. It's a really tough switch. A lot of times the families I work with, the foster families, the resource parents that I work with, they're asking themselves, where does this ambivalence come from? So where does this ambivalence come from? This ambivalence a lot of times comes from fear. What's going to happen next? How are things going to change? Sometimes people are concerned about, I'm going to lose you as my friend or as my support system because you are going to be so overwhelmed. They're going to experience grief. They miss the way that things were. What I find is that a lot of times foster and adoptive families, resource families, were the rocks in their support networks. They were the people who really helped others and really supported others in their families, with their friend groups. And suddenly they are now occupied with the needs of this child who's drowning in stress. Sometimes we also have people who maybe have different beliefs about trauma. Maybe they're a little old school, maybe they've had their own experiences that make them worried or scared or cause them stress. So I know that it comes up that sometimes they look at this child who's been a victim of so much and they wonder to themselves, is this child going to turn from a victim to a perpetrator? If this child was hurt, can they hurt someone else? Sometimes they're also a little bit in denial. This is actually where I see families sort of getting killed with kindness, is they see you as a resource parent, as a foster parent, as this amazing person doing this amazing thing, and they see you coping with an enormous amount of stress, and they think you're fine because they are believing the hype. You are putting the hype out there that you can handle anything, and they are believing you because you haven't figured out how to ask for help yet. You're not alone in your family and friends having these thoughts and feelings, and we can sort of recruit them past this, and we can help them understand. What I don't want you to do is feel judged or to judge in return. It is so different to care for another family's child, a child from trauma, a child from loss and grief, and they might need time and support to understand. So we're going to give them a little bit of education. This is the spectrum of attachment. So we've got 4 types of attachment up here. Again, this is not the only model of attachment that exists in the world, but it's the one I'm going to use today. We all fall somewhere on this spectrum, whether we're here and secure, whether we trend towards being anxious, we're a little avoidant. We fall somewhere on here. Secure attachment is what we want. This is victory. This is a successful adult that has been raised to trust others and to not be overwhelmed by their anxiety. So that's the goal. Anxious attachment is the attachment of neglect, the attachment of only having their needs met sometimes. So an anxious attachment is someone who maybe their parent uses drugs or has mental health problems, isn't always there for them. So they feel they have to cling, they have to yell, they have to scream, they have to beg for the things that they need. And that is a really, really difficult way to live. For children, this can look like a child who is screaming and crying and wants to be held, but when you hold them, they don't feel comfort because they think you're going to leave again. This is a very challenging child sometimes to care for because they need you all the time. We also have our avoidant children and our avoidant adults. These are the people who, when they needed something, it may not have been provided at all. And if it was provided with harsh words, with rejection, with dismissiveness. And what they learned is that it's actually better to take care of yourself. Trusting other people is dangerous and it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't get you the things that you need. So these are our children that treat us like roommates, that ask for things that they need, but don't want the emotional engagement that we have to offer. They don't want to be comforted or loved, mostly because they don't think you will. We want them to gain emotional attachment and security, just the same way we want our anxious kids to lower their anxiety and to feel secure. And then we have our disorganized kids. So in the world, avoidant, secure, and anxious are actually in general pretty equally distributed. All of you know someone who falls into each of these categories. Disorganized is pretty rare out there in the world, but it's really common in foster care because what creates disorganization is abuse, is severe neglect, is essentially damaging a child at such a young age that they are not able to understand the world around them or predict how their behavior is going to be received and responded to. So you end up with children who have bizarre reactions, unpredictable behavior. A lot of time when people think about this, they think about it as the child with big tantrums or the cussing or acting out. But it can also be the tearful child who can be having a perfectly good day and then absolutely lose it and melt down and cry. And it can also be the child that doesn't have a reaction at all, that is so shut down and closed off and non-reactive that sometimes it feels like you're watering a houseplant instead of taking care of a child. That is not normal for children, and it's not good for children. When you have a family, friend, someone in your circle who is used to dealing with secure people, maybe anxious people, maybe avoidant people, what I find is that they struggle to understand a person with a disorganized attachment. And so your job is going to be able to help them understand that child that's having that tantrum, that child that's having that crying fit, that child who is not responding to any stimulus or interaction at all, is a child that can grow in security, that can attach, but it's going to take time and energy from you, and you need help. One of the things that I really like for you to do, and this is going to be something that I really want you to reflect on during this training and after this training, is where do you fall in that spectrum? What kind of attachment style do your friends and family have? Do you share an attachment style with your foster child? So I particularly, I'll share, I trend towards anxious. So I am mostly secure, but I have a history of anxious attachment as a child. I have children that I've cared for who are very avoidant, who shut me out, who don't want my love and attention, and that has been emotionally hard for me. And I have had to lean on my family and friends to reassure me and build me up so that I don't feel like that child hates me. Because you know what? It's not that child's fault, and it's not their job to make me feel loved, right? That's my job as a parent. So when we think about attachment styles, we need to understand our friends and family, our circle is there to support us so we can support the child. We don't want to lean on the child for that support. So we've learned, what helps trauma is having those secure relationships, those trustworthy people. And we've also learned that to change attachment, we need those secure relationships and trustworthy people. So are we those people for these kids? Sometimes I have a mixed class usually. We'll have people who foster for a few days or a few weeks, and we'll have people who adopted years ago, right? But here's the thing. Children's attachment systems are always on. They don't turn off. So that means that if you have a sustained, committed relationship with that child, you can be their attachment figure. You can be that safe, trustworthy person that helps them grow from insecurity to security, which also has the benefit of reducing their toxic stress. And it isn't necessarily even about how much time you have with a child. It's about whether or not that child becomes attached. It is about your commitment. It's about your capacity to meet that child's emotional needs. So what I like to say is that it's not always about attachment. Sometimes it's about bonding. So bonding is the parental feeling of being connected to a child, experiencing a sense of unconditional love, that closeness that we feel with children. Attachment is how that child feels the need to be close to a protective caregiver. Bonding is what you are going to be doing so that your child can feel attached. You may have months of bonding to do before that child believes you because they've been hurt before. And so when you have concerned friends and family saying, I don't know if this child's a fit for your home. I don't know if this child works for you. This child doesn't seem to like you. It doesn't seem to be attached to you, or doesn't seem to be getting better. You have to remind your friends and family, I have bonding that I need to do so that this child can trust me and feel secure and attached. Downside. All right, I'm not going to say that's easy, because it's not. And one of the things that happens is we end up with exposure to secondary trauma. And this is really where we need support. But secondary trauma is when the world starts to look darker and scarier. Secondary trauma happens when we experience a shift in our worldview because we're exposed to the trauma, the stories, the experiences of individuals who have been hurt and traumatized. So this can really change our fundamental beliefs about the world. And it is much more likely to happen when we work with kids. An example of this is I experienced secondary trauma as a social worker because I started feeling like men were less trustworthy than women because I would see children who had been hurt by men. So that was when I realized that I was experiencing the world looking scarier than it used to, and I was experiencing a change in my worldview, and it wasn't fair to the men in my life because there are plenty of trustworthy men out there who need to be judged on their individual merits, right? So signs that you're experiencing this, that the toxic stress that your child's holding inside of them is affecting you, is when you are exhausted and that taking a break doesn't help. You're feeling hopeless or fatigued. You're feeling anger or frustration, sometimes with the child. Why can't you just let me love you? Or you're experiencing that same frustration with the system. Why is the system hurting this child again when they've already been through so much? And the result is that you feel discouraged and you might start pulling away from a child. You might feel like, I have nothing left to give. That is what secondary trauma looks like. And that's when you might need more. And so caregiving is not easy, and it can sometimes really hurt us deeply. Sometimes we need more than our circle. Okay, so I like to just take this moment in this training to say professional support, getting your own therapist, getting your own social worker, getting your own person that can help guide you and support you beyond what a friend or family member can do is sometimes necessary when we're caring for high needs kids. Especially if maybe we're helping kids because maybe one time we were the kid that needed help. So if this is bringing up things for you, if this is triggering you, if this is causing you secondary trauma, we need to look at that. I use the SCARED tool. It's just a quick little tool that I run through with families. I run through with parents that lets me know, or do you need more? Do you need professional intervention? Do you need professional support? So have you had a sudden change in your sleeping habits? Are you suddenly crying? Are you more clingy? Do you feel like you can't be alone or do this alone? Are you afraid of things that you didn't used to be afraid of before? Okay. Think of a parent who didn't used to be scared to be home alone with a toddler, but now, I can't do it, I can't do it. Are you refusing to participate in things that you would have loved to do before? Are you missing out on enjoyable things? Are you avoiding things that used to give you joy? Are you jumpy? This is one that people sometimes forget, but are you jumpy? Are you jumping at every noise, every slammed door? Are you imagining the baby crying at all hours? And are you experiencing that you are being the aggressive one? You are being the disruptive one. You're the one having a tantrum. Because one of the things that I tell parents too is it is not just kids that have tantrums. I'm not immune, and neither are you. And sometimes we need to take ourselves to have a little bit of a timeout. But if this is a pattern, if you see not just one of these things, not just two of these things, but a pattern of these things, that's when I would say you know that you need professional support. You need someone more like me, a therapist, to help support you. So we've talked about sometimes how our families show up for us. We've talked about what they need to know in order to help us. We've talked about knowing ourselves enough to accept help and know what to ask for. Now, how do I find some of these people? Who's going to help me? So, listen, some of us show up with a ton of people ready to jump in and help, and I love that for you. But what I find is if you sign up for this class, you're here listening to me talk about this, it's usually because you don't have enough of those people. before we talk about adding people to our circle, we're going to talk about safety. Our children are the most vulnerable children out there. The best predictor of whether someone will be abused in the future is whether they were abused before. I hate that. It's a depressing statistic, and it is not their fault. There are people out there who are looking for vulnerable children, and if you have had your boundaries crossed before, you're not going to have the same reaction when they get crossed again, and that's what predatory people are looking for. Okay? So our children are vulnerable, and it's our job to keep them safe. And so when we're burnt out as parents or caregivers, that is a huge risk factor in our children being abused or neglected. So we need you guys to be supported. The reason we want this so badly is because if you get too burnt out, your children are not going to have the active, engaged, supportive parents that are protecting these kids, noticing when something's wrong, and making good choices about who and where and when their children are out and about. We also need to make sure that we are not accepting help from unknown or unvetted resources. So when we're burnt out, sometimes any lifeline feels like a miracle, right? I just want to grab onto it. But we need to be critical, thoughtful, and mindful. Who is offering this help? Do I know this person? Do I know this agency? Do I have credentials? Do we have referrals, references? Do we have supervision? So we're not going to take any lifeline. We're going to take a lifeline that's safe. I was the resource parent for teenagers for a really long time. And kids can tell when you're tired. Isn't that terrible? Older children are going to take themselves on a journey into trouble when they know that you do not have the energy to supervise them properly. This is the reason we need to get ahead of our self-care, of our circle of support, because if we leave them unsupervised, they will take that as an invitation to get into trouble that we do not need them to get into. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, we're only going to take those safe lifelines, and we're going to try and make sure that the level of supervision stays high for our kids. Who can we reach out to be a part of our circle? First of all, you're going to look at your foster care community. Okay? Marin County specifically has them. If you're from another county, you're going to look into your Resource Parent Association, your Foster Parent Association. You're going to ask your county social worker if they have a respite care program, because that's usually how you're going to get connected to your foster care community. So the pros of this, they're background checked, right? Everyone who's a foster parent got those fingerprints done. They're often experienced. They're local to you. They know the rules. You're not going to have to teach them how to be a caregiver for foster care. Downside, these are your busiest people in your circle. They are often overwhelmed with their own households and own children. And this is where creating reciprocal communities really helps. Okay? This is where offering to help others and receiving that help in return and that reciprocity can build relationships that really benefit the kids you're taking care of. How about our brand new foster parents, right? Our resource families that are, maybe they've been background checked, they've done the training, but they've never done this before. What I find is that they are the ones who are volunteering the most. They are very interested, they're very enthusiastic, they have the time and the energy. They know some of the rules. They've usually done some of the training or all of the training, but never the hands-on part. But what I will say is that enthusiasm is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. So they may have an idealized idea of what it will be like to take care of your child that you care for, and they may be unprepared for the impact of toxic stress on that child's behavior. or on themselves. So they might still be learning. So what I would say is I love this as a resource, but we start small and we build up. This is where we're going to do babysitting, a few hours. We're going to go out to eat. We're going to go to the mall. We're going to go to an activity. We're not necessarily going to drop them off for the weekend until this family has gotten some of that hands-on experience. Now, how about just regular parents, right? A lot of us, we, got biological children, and they made friends, and then we had to meet their parents, and we either liked them or we didn't like them, but now we got to hang out with them. And Susie's mom will do sleepovers as long as I take Susie for a sleepover sometimes. So this is the natural reciprocity and community that exists. Children in foster care are children. They're regular kids. They're going to go to school. They're going to make friends. You're going to meet those friends' parents. So pros of this: parents do understand the struggle of parenting, right? And what you will find is that if you are connecting with parents of kids with special needs, they're going to understand you the best, because trauma is its own special need. So join the parent groups, go to the PTA meeting, hang out with the parents at the pickup line, find that energy to engage. And you might already have these friends. So maybe your child is friends with Susie, whose mom thinks what you're doing is great and is willing to help you not just with your little one, but also your bonus little one. Okay, so they might already be in your circle or close to being pulled in. These are the folks that you are going to have to educate about trauma in the foster care system. These are the ones that you're going to have to give the rundown. Hey, we don't put pictures on social media. Hey, if something happens, you need to call me right away. Hey, we don't give medication unless I give you the thumbs up on medication, right? These are the things that we need to make sure that they understand, those ground rules. And depending on where you live and what the regulations are in your county, you may only be able to use them for a certain amount of time. Usually it is 72 hours, right? So again, they're a great resource, but they do have some limitations. This is one that I think gets overlooked way too often with children in foster care because people are nervous and anxious. And that's the fact that this child has a family. Wherever this child came from, they came from somewhere, and there are people there. I mentioned I have 7 kids. 3 of them are adults now. Every single one of my children has someone in their family that is a lovely, reliable person. And we're not able to care for my child full time, but doesn't mean that they can't be a resource for that child. The pro of that is they know them. There's a bond, there's an investment. They are committed to that child because they love that particular child. And so because they're so invested in supporting the child, they're going to be invested in supporting you and your family. Downside, we often don't know them when they first come in. Some of you are probably kinship family members, so you will have known them, but maybe there's some awkwardness, there's hurt feelings, there's strife, maybe there's disagreements. And so there's sometimes some relationship building or some relationship healing that needs to be done so that we can be trusting of them as caregivers. And we also need permission. So this is one where you can have a child family team meeting. You can talk to your county social worker and you can say, is there a safe person in this family that wants to spend time with my child? Because if there is, that can be an amazing thing for both of you. I'll say that my oldest daughter, her grandmother, is now, in a way, a grandmother to my other kids as well. And having that has been incredibly valuable for us, for all of us. So, now that we know where we're going to be looking for the circle, let's talk about asking for help from our circle. I'm going to read you the Caregiver's Bill of Rights. This is a little document. It's created in Canada. We love those Canadians. I am a Canadian. This is not in any legislation. This is not anything official, but what this is, I think, is a very good list of things that I want you to take to heart. So what this says is, I have the right as a caregiver to be respected for the caregiving I choose to do. I have the right to take pride in my caregiving and know that I am making a difference. To garner appreciation and validation for the care that I give to others. To receive adequate support to provide necessary care. To discern my personal boundaries and have others respect my choices. To seek assistance from others if and when it's necessary. To take time apart to re-energize myself. To socialize, to maintain my interest, to sustain a balanced lifestyle. I have the right to have my own feelings, including negative emotions like anger, sadness, frustration. I have the right to express my thoughts and feelings to appropriate people at appropriate times. I have the right to convey hope to the individuals in my care. And I have the right to believe that those that I care for are going to prosper in mind, body, and spirit as a result of my caregiving. These are the things that you have to believe to feel entitled to ask for the support that you need. You have a right to take time apart, to socialize, to have interests. You have the right to take pride in the caregiving that you do. You deserve to have help. So, what can you ask your circle to do when you're feeling that effect of secondary trauma, you're feeling fatigued, you're feeling like you need help? This is a gathering of themes that I've put together from families that I've worked with, and hopefully it will reflect a little bit in how you feel. Families want you as a support person to share their space. So you can ask your circle of support, join me, come to me, be with me. Don't ask me to come to you. I might not have the energy, I might not have the time, but I don't want to be alone. So this is where having a friend bring their child to your home, having a friend come to your neighborhood to get lunch, having a friend call you is an amazing thing. I set this up with all of my circle, which is no advice unless I ask for it. And I'm probably not going to. Advice is often wonderful, but unless you're volunteering to do it for me, it can be overwhelming, it can be hollow, it can feel judgmental, diminishing, it can feel like I just one more thing to do. And so I encourage it. Support and advice do not necessarily go together. Okay? Advice is a support you need to ask for. Immediate needs, I think, are something that is very concrete to ask for. And you know what? We do this great for when someone has a baby. When we've got a friend that's walking around with that big tummy that is, ready to pop, we come together. We say, let me set up a meal train for you. We say, let me get you some diapers. We say, let me make sure that your freezer is stocked. We say, let me make sure that, you've got hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes and anything that you need. We don't do that very well for foster care. People are awkward around foster care. So sometimes we need to issue an invitation to say, I need some stuff. I need you to just feed me. You know what? If you're worried about me, if you're thinking about me, nothing says that you're thinking about me like offering to order pizza for my kids. So I don't have to make dinner tonight. Nothing says that you love me and care about me like coming over and sitting on my couch so that I can be upstairs taking a nap or doing laundry. Nothing says that you are a fabulous friend like coming over to hang out and talk and load the dishwasher while you're here. So again, sometimes it can be these little things that take something off of your plate because this child's needs have added so much to it. This is a boundary that I really encourage resource parents, adoptive parents to talk about with their families. Just, I don't want you to tell me to be positive. I don't want you to tell me to look on the bright side or it's all uphill from here. It's only going to get better. What I want you to do is listen to what I'm saying and tell me that that sounds hard or that that sounds sad. That sounds like a lot. So what I want to teach my circle and what I hope you will teach your circle is listen when I'm talking and tell me what it sounds like. Because it's easy to second guess yourself, and sometimes we just need someone to tell us. We need our circle to be a judgment-free zone because sometimes secondary trauma looks like anger, frustration, or wanting to give up. I know that I had a really bad day like 10 years ago, and I called someone and I said, I don't know if I can do this. And they did the best thing in the world that they could have done in that moment, which was to tell me, yes, you can. You are doing this. It would have been just as easy for them to say, it's okay, you can give up, you don't have to. Because you know what, I know that already. I know I don't have to. All of us are here because we want to be here. But sometimes we need someone to tell us, yes, you can, and yes, you are. And so I tell my family, no matter how upset I am, or sad, or frustrated, or angry, or whatever, or fed up, you need to tell me, you can do this, and you are, and you can do a good job, and I'm going to help you. So you give them that script for what you need to hear when you're in a moment of crisis. So how can your circle help? Let's just summarize this. So far we know trauma reactions can last a long time after trauma, even when a child is safe and you are a safe person with a safe household. We know that trauma creates trauma, that secondary trauma comes from caregiving. And we also know that children rely on safe, emotionally secure caregivers to find healing. So what this means is that we need to be safe and emotionally secure when we're under an enormous amount of stress. So we need to think to ourselves, what can our circle do? Me, my own, my individual life. After this training, here's what I want you to do, because we're about to finish. First of all, I want you to think to yourself, who can I text or call or email or IM and say thank you for the help that they've offered so far? Someone has done your dishes. Someone has ordered pizza. Someone has said, that sounds really hard, instead of, it'll get better. Whoever that person is in your life that's already doing these wonderful things, tell them so, and tell them how much you love them and appreciate them for it. And then I want you to think, who can I text to ask for 1 hour, 1 day, 1 moment of supportive energy? Who out there has told you that they want to help, but hasn't really followed through or doesn't really know how, or they miss you? This is a person you would have spent time with, but because you're so tired and exhausted or you're needed so much that you haven't. And I want you to reach out to them and invite them to bring their supportive energy with them and come see you. I also want you to ask yourself, what agency is out there to support you and the child you're caring for? Because every child in foster care has someone that is supposed to be looking out for them, and looking out for you is looking out for that child. Even post-adoption, or post-adoption services statewide in California. Even for kinship, there are kinship support services statewide in California. And the final thing that I'm just going to leave you with, it's going to be the last thing we talk about today, is have you asked for what you need? Because what I find is that families often have an idea of what would be helpful for them. They have an idea of what would feel good for them, but they feel like they don't want to ask or they don't know how to ask. And this is where I'm going to say, you need to ask for what you need. And if you can do that even one time, it gets easier and easier and easier every time after that. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've got 7 kids. I support other families, and I would not be able to do it without having built a circle of support around me. So you can do it too. Thank you so much for sticking with this training, for doing this online. If you look in the YouTube description, there'll be a link to a quiz. If you need a certificate of attendance, if you need these hours for training hours, at the moment, these training hours are validated for Marin County resource parents, but may be accepted by other counties, and you're welcome to reach out to me by email as well if you want to confirm or figure that out. But if you need a certificate, please take the quiz and give me your contact information so you can then receive it. Thank you so much for sticking with me for this hour, and good luck, and I hope you feel as supported as you can.